Welcome, dear dreamer, to another night with Whispers of the Night. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet time here, where the world slows and stories drift like gentle lullabies into the stillness. I will share with you a tale called The Orchard Where Memories Grew. It's a story about an enchanted place-on orchard where every leaf and branch carries the warmth of the past and the promise of tomorrow. A place where memories bloom like blossoms, waiting to be discovered once more. Before we begin, let me gently remind you if these whispered stories help you find calm and rest. I invite you to subscribe to Whispers of the Night. By doing so, you'll always have a comforting story waiting for you, ready to guide you into sleep, night after night. Now, dear dreamer, settle into the comfort of your bed. Feel the way your pillow supports your head, how the blankets wrap around you like a gentle embrace. Allow the weight of the day to fall away as though it were carried off by the evening breeze. There is no need to think about tomorrow or yesterday. For this moment, there is only the softness of now, only the rhythm of your breath, slow and steady, like the rustling of tall grass in a quiet orchard. Let the hush of this night cradle you. Let the sound of this voice remind you that you are safe and you are exactly where you need to be. And so when you are ready, we shall step together into the orchard where memories wait to grow. Before we begin the story itself, let's take a few moments to gently prepare your mind and body for rest. If your eyes are still open, you may close them now. Allow the darkness behind your eyelids to feel safe and soft. Take a slow breath in and release it gently. As you do, notice how the weight of the day begins to melt away, little by little. Breathe in once more, slowly, deeply, as though you are inhaling the cool, refreshing air of a quiet orchard at night. And breathe out, softer now, lighter, as though you are releasing a sigh that drifts into the evening breeze. With each breath, let yourself sink deeper into calm. Feel your shoulders grow heavy, as if the tension is dripping away. Let your arms soften, your hands fall still. Even the tiny muscles of your face relax, as if they too are ready to rest. Now, in your mind's eye, picture a winding path of tall grass. Each step you take sends a soft rustle through the stems, a sound like whispers brushing against your skin. The air here smells faintly of apple sweet, comforting, familiar as you walk further. The path leads you to an old iron gate. Its frame is tangled with vines, glimmering faintly in the silver glow of the moon. You place your hand on the cool metal, and with a gentle push, the gate swings open. Beyond it lies the orchard, waiting. You step inside, and immediately a deep sense of calm washes over you. The grass sways gently in the breeze. Fireflies drift lazily among the trees, their lights blinking softly. Like stars come down to earth, you notice the rhythm of your own breath matching the rhythm of the orchard, the gentle sway of the leaves, the slow pulse of life all around you. You walk until you find a tree that feels just right. Its trunk is strong and steady, its branches spreading wide as though to shelter you. You sit beneath it, feeling the firm ground supporting you. Beside you, a cat curls close, its purr low and steady, like a lullaby written just for you. The orchard hums softly. You can almost feel its roots deep below, twining into the earth, whispering to one another in a language older than time. Above you, the stars scatter like seeds across the night sky, each one shining softly, asking for nothing but to guide you toward dreams. With every breath, you grow heavier, more relaxed. Each thought that rises in your mind drifts away like a cloud across the moon. There is nothing to hold on to, nothing to do, nothing to change. Just the calm orchard, the still night, and the gentle story about to unfold. Stay here in this calm for a moment longer, your body at ease, your heart steady, your mind light. You are ready now, ready to let the orchard's story carry you as we begin our tale. The orchard where memories grew. The orchard where memories grew. The gate in the tall grass. Maris had always been a wanderer of small, forgotten paths. Even as a child, she had a way of finding roots. No one else seemed to notice narrow deer tracks in the woods, foot-worn trails pressed by those long gone, or shortcuts between walls where the ivy grew thick and untrimmed. There was something in her eyes, a sensitivity to what the world tried to keep hidden. When others passed by without pause, she lingered. When others hurried on with their errands and duties, she strayed, curious and unafraid of silence. It was on a late afternoon, with the light turning to the mellow gold of summer's end, that she found the path in the tall grass. She had not been looking for it, not exactly. She had been walking along the edge of a meadow that sloped gently down from the old road. The air smelled faintly of warm earth and wild clover. Bees droned lazily among the blossoms, and the sky carried that peculiar hush of a day that had burned brightly, but now softened into a slower rhythm. The tall grass grew almost shoulder-high, swaying like a tide that only the wind commanded. It was thick enough that from the road, nothing but the endless green and gold tips would be visible. Yet, as she walked, her gaze snagged on a subtle irregularity, faint depression in the sea of grass, as though something had passed through long ago and pressed the stems into a memory of movement. It was not wide enough to be a farmer's track. It was not straight enough to be made by machines. It curved like a question, an invitation, as though it bent deliberately away from what was known. Maris hesitated at the edge, her breath stilled for a moment. This was not an ordinary curiosity. She felt it like a tug behind her ribs, a whisper she couldn't quite hear yet, couldn't ignore. She looked back up the road, empty, quiet, untroubled. The stalks brushed against her arms as she parted them. Each step carrying her deeper into the wavering sea. The world changed the moment she entered. The sound of the road dulled. The sky narrowed into slim ribbons above her, framed by green blades that leaned and whispered. She felt as if she were slipping between the cracks of time itself, into a pocket where only the patient waited. Birds wheeled overhead, but their cries grew faint. Even the cicadas seemed to hush, as though aware she had crossed some unseen threshold. The path was not easy to follow, but she did not lose it. It was as if her feet remembered what her mind did not, carrying her forward with quiet certainty. At times, it seemed to vanish, swallowed by the grass. Yet, just ahead, there would always be another faint bend, another pressed stem, leading her onward. The earth beneath was firm, old, as though many footsteps once trod here, though now it had been long abandoned, after what felt both like minutes and like hours. She came to a place where the grass fell away into a clearing. There, framed by the slow hush of the field, stood an iron gate. It was tall, arched, and heavy, its bars entwined with vines that had grown unchecked for decades. Rust flaked across the metal in reddish blooms, and the hinges sagged as though weary of holding the weight of memory. Yet, for all its neglect, there was a strange dignity in the gate. It stood proud, as if guarding something more than what the eye could see. Maris's breath caught. She had seen gates before, countless ones at gardens, at estates, at the edges of villages, but this was different. This one was not built for keeping people out, nor merely for decoration. It felt almost alive, as though it had waited for someone, for her, for a long, patient span of years. Her hand lifted of its own accord. The iron was cool against her fingertips, despite the warmth of the day. She traced the curve of the bars, noticing how the vines curled as though in gentle embrace. Small white flowers bloomed between the twists, fragile but persistent. The scent was faintly sweet, mingling with the rust, and beyond the gate, she saw it, the orchard. It stretched out like a dream, preserved in amber. Rows of trees stood in quiet formation, their branches heavy with leaves that shimmered with a strange, silvery green under the fading sunlight. Some bore fruit, round and pale as if carved from moonlight. Others seemed to hum softly, a sound not quite of this world. It wasn't music exactly, nor wind, but something between, like the murmur of voices just beyond comprehension, layered and timeless. Maris felt the hum in her bones more than in her ears. It was a low, resonant thrum, as though the trees themselves breathed, as though they recognized her. The sensation was not frightening. Instead, it was profoundly familiar, the way a lullaby from childhood might feel when heard again after many years, strange and comforting all at once. Her heart quickened. She grasped the gate more firmly, testing it. At first, it resisted. The hinges groaned like old sleepers disturbed from dreams. But then, with a deep, aching sigh, the gate yielded. It swung inward, slow but steady, and the vines that clung to it trembled as if reluctant to let go. The air changed as soon as the opening widened. A cool breeze drifted out, carrying with it a scent unlike anything she had known before. It was a mixture of ripe fruit, rain-soaked soil, and something softer, something that reminded her of linen left in sunlight, or pages of a book long unread. It smelled of memory itself, fragile and sweet. Maris stepped across the threshold. The hum grew louder, though never harsh. It enveloped her, 1,000 voices of leaves and roots, speaking at once in a language just beyond the edge of hearing. She turned slowly, taking in the sight. The orchard was vast, far larger than the clearing had suggested. The trees were old, their trunks gnarled and twisted, but their branches thrived, heavy with life. They seemed to pulse with an inner glow, as if each carried a lantern at its core. She reached for one of the fruits. It was cool, smooth, and faintly luminous under her touch. For a moment, she imagined she could see her own reflection in it, not her face, as it was now, but a younger self, laughing freely under some forgotten sky. Startled, she let her hand fall back. The hum deepened, not unkindly, as though acknowledging her hesitation. Everywhere she looked, the orchard seemed filled with echoes. A patch of earth by the roots stirred with the faint impression of footsteps, though no one stood there. The wind carried fragments of laughter, quick and vanishing. In the branches, she thought she saw flickers of figures, silhouettes of people she could almost name, though the moment she focused, they dissolved back into leaves. Her chest ached with something she couldn't quite name. It was not sorrow exactly, though tears pricked at her eyes. It was not joy either, though her lips trembled with the urge to smile. It was a blending, a reminder of all the moments that made her who she was, the fleeting days of childhood, the warmth of those long gone, the stories whispered at night when she was small. She walked deeper into the orchard. Her feet found the path instinctively, though it twisted and wound in ways no map could record. Each step seemed to draw forth more whispers, more hums. A breeze stirred, lifting her hair. And for a fleeting instant, she thought she heard her mother's voice calling her name, the way she once had from the kitchen doorway on summer evenings. Maris, her heart clenched. She spun around. The orchard was empty, only the trees, watching with their silent, patient grace. But the sound lingered, soft as an echo inside her chest. She pressed her hand against her heart. The orchard wasn't just a place of trees. It was a keeper, a gatherer. It held something more precious than fruit held memory, distilled into breath and leaf and hum. For a long time, she stood still, letting the orchard's rhythm merge with her own heartbeat. The light shifted, deepening toward dusk, painting the leaves with a bronze glow. Shadows stretched long between the rows. Yet, even as the world darkened, the orchard did not feel threatening. Instead, it glowed more brightly, as though the trees themselves carried starlight waiting to emerge. Maris finally turned back toward the gate. The tall iron arch still stood behind her, half hidden now by the shadows. Part of her wanted to remain, to sink deeper into this realm where past and present intertwined. But another part, quieter yet insistent, told her this was only the beginning. The orchard had shown itself, but not fully. It had opened its arms, but its secrets still slumbered within. She stepped back, across the threshold. The hum softened, retreating into a low murmur. The air of the meadow returned warmer, ordinary, scented with grass and clover once more. Behind her, the gate shivered, as though reluctant to let her go, but it swung shut, the vines wrapping themselves more tightly around its bars. Maris placed her hand on the iron one last time. A faint vibration answered her, a quiet promise that the orchard would wait, and with that, she stepped back into the tall grass. The path closed around her, but this time she did not feel lost. She knew now that she had been found. Apples of yesterday. The orchard waited for her all through the night after her first discovery. Maris had dreamt of its hum. Even in sleep, she had felt it, a low, steady rhythm that curled like smoke around her thoughts. She woke before dawn, restless and unable to shake the sense that the trees were still calling her. All through the morning, she wandered distractedly through her errands, barely tasting her tea, her mind returning again and again to the pale shimmer of leaves, the faint glimmer of fruit, and the way the gate had groaned open like an old throat clearing after silence. By the afternoon, she could no longer resist. She found herself once again at the tall grass, the hidden depression winding its curve, and the iron gate standing with quiet authority at the end. It did not surprise her this time. The orchard had revealed itself, and though gates were meant to separate, she knew now that this one only waited. She slipped through. Inside, the orchard breathed around her. The air here was cooler, sharper, as though time had slowed and condensed into something denser than the world outside. The trees seemed to bow slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. She walked among them carefully, aware of their weight, their gravity. It wasn't long before her hand brushed against the low-hanging branch of one particular tree. Its bark was ridged with age, grooved deep as the lines of a palm that had known work and sorrow and love. The branch held apples, unlike those she had ever seen in market stalls or baskets. They were small, round, their skin pale green like river glass, with a faint mist clinging to them as though dew had never left their surface. Drawn without thinking, Maris plucked one. The stem snapped cleanly, and for a moment she simply held it. The fruit was cool in her palm, faintly luminous, as though it had caught the memory of moonlight even beneath the sun. She lifted it closer. Its scent was delicate, carrying not the tart sharpness of orchard apples she knew, but something softer, like fresh linen, like pages turned in an old book, like something deeply familiar, yet nearly forgotten. She bit into it. The taste was unlike any fruit she had ever known. It was sweet, yes, but not simply sweet. It was layered, unfolding like a story. Each chew drew forth something new, the warmth of summer, the hush of twilight, the echo of footsteps on a wooden floor. And then, before she could place the sensation fully, a sound rose in her chest and filled her ears. Laughter, not her own, not the echo of children in the distance. It was the laughter of her grandmother. It came so vividly, so impossibly close, that Maris nearly dropped the apple. Her breath caught and her vision blurred. She closed her eyes and she was there. The orchard dissolved. The golden light shifted, reshaping itself. She stood once more in her grandmother's kitchen. The old window above the sink let in a square of afternoon sun, and dust motes danced within it like flecks of gold. On the table lay a half-finished quilt, its fabric squares uneven but alive with color, and her grandmother tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair pulled back and eyes full of mirth, was laughing. The sound filled the room. It was the same laugh Maris had heard 100 times in childhood, rich, full, tumbling from her, like water breaking free from a dam. It rolled out, unself-conscious, unrestrained, a laugh that had always seemed too big for the walls around it. Maris could see her grandmother's shoulders shake, could hear the scrape of her chair against the wooden floor. She could even smell the faint sweetness of stewed apples cooling on the windowsill. The air was thick with cinnamon and warmth. The memory wrapped itself around her, not like a dream, but like truth. Her fingers twitched, and she realized she was holding something thread. She was small again, perched on the edge of the chair, watching, laughing too. She remembered the way her grandmother teased her for pricking her finger, and the way she kissed the tiny wound with mock ceremony, declaring it a warrior's scar. The tears came without permission. They slid down her cheeks, hot and salt, dripping into the folds of memory. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the kitchen faded. The scent of cinnamon dissolved into the faint perfume of orchard air. The laughter softened, stretching into a hum, and the hum sank back into the leaves around her. Maris opened her eyes. She was back. The apple was still in her hand. Her heart pounded. The orchard had shown her something impossible, something she had not expected. Not a dream, not an echo her grandmother's laughter. Alive again, carried whole from the past into her present. She held the apple closer. Its flesh, where she had bitten, glowed faintly, as though some inner light had been released. She pressed it to her lips, whispering, "Thank you," though whether to the tree, the fruit, or the memory itself, she could not say. As she stood, she realized the orchard had shifted subtly. The trees no longer hummed in unison. Instead, the sound pulsed from different directions, layered and distinct, like conversations overlapping in a crowded room. She turned, and for the first time she understood each tree was a vessel. Each carried its own cadence, its own register of hum, and within that hum was memory. The orchard was not simply alive, it remembered. Her knees weakened, and she sank down at the base of the tree, apple still cradled in her hand. The truth rippled through her like the slow spread of light across dawn. This was no ordinary grove. It was a keeper, a guardian of moments lost to time. Somehow, impossibly, the orchard had preserved them the laughter, of her grandmother, the warmth of summers long gone, the delicate threads of her own story woven with others. She closed her eyes again, breathing in the orchard's rhythm. She could almost sense other memories waiting, countless apples carrying the echoes of countless days. But this thought came with another, heavier one. If the orchard remembered, then what else did it hold? Was it only laughter? Only sweetness? Or did it also guard the sorrows, the wounds, the days one might rather forget? Maris looked down at the apple in her hand. Its glow had dimmed, but the memory it had carried remained alive within her. She could still hear the laughter if she let her mind tilt toward it. She pressed her forehead against the rough bark of the tree and whispered her grandmother's name. The wind stirred. A branch shifted above her. The hum deepened, not sorrowful, not joyous, simply present. Maris sat there until the sky began to dim and the orchard's glow grew stronger, until the world outside felt distant and faint. She thought of the years since her grandmother's passing, of the grief she had carried quietly, the ache she had folded into herself like the fabric squares of that quilt. She thought of how much she had missed the sound of that laugh, how she had feared it would vanish from her forever. And now, here it was again, offered back to her by a tree whose roots sank into earth that seemed older than time. When she finally rose, her legs stiff, she placed the apple gently at the tree's base. Its glow had nearly faded, but she could not bring herself to discard it. It belonged here as part of the orchard's keeping. As she walked back toward the gate, the hum of other trees followed her. She glanced at them, rows upon rows of guardians, and wondered whose memories lay there. Were they hers alone, harvested from her own forgotten corners? Or did the orchard hold the laughter, the tears, the lives of many who had walked before her? Did every visitor leave a trace? Did every apple carry a fragment of a soul? The questions swirled, but she did not need answers yet. It was enough to know that the orchard had given her something precious, her grandmother's laughter, a sound she had thought lost forever. At the gate she paused, hand against the cool iron. The vines rustled softly, as if reminding her, "You may go, but you will return." And she knew she would, for the orchard was no longer just a hidden grove. It was a mirror of time, a keeper of yesterday's sweetness, a place where the heart could be fed by what it feared forgotten. And now that she had tasted it, she knew she could not stay away. Maris stepped through the gate, the hum fading behind her, the tall grass closing like a curtain. But even as she walked back toward the ordinary world, the memory of her grandmother's laughter trailed after her life, bright and whole as though the orchard itself had placed it gently into her keeping once more. The Tree of Forgotten Songs. Maris returned to the orchard as though she had never left. The rhythm of her days was already bending toward it, as if the hidden gate. She found herself drifting toward the meadow without thinking, drawn by an unseen thread. The tall grass no longer felt like an obstacle, but a passage, one she could walk, even with her eyes half closed, guided by the quiet hum that echoed in her bones. The gate stood waiting, its iron face softened by vines, and when her hand touched the bars, it yielded more easily than before, the hinges groaning less in protest. The orchard seemed to recognize her now, or perhaps it had simply been waiting for her return. Inside, the air greeted her with its familiar coolness, carrying scents that seemed half earth, half memory. The trees stood in solemn welcome, their leaves glowing faintly with that inner light. She paused for a long moment, simply breathing it in before walking deeper among the rows. Her eyes roved over branches, heavy with fruit, each one whispering its own quiet invitation. She resisted the urge to pluck another apple immediately, not because she feared the memories, but because she sensed the orchard wanted her to wander further, to discover what else it held. And so she walked. The orchard stretched in ways that defied reason. Paths she hadn't noticed before unfurled like ribbons at her feet, curving gently between trees that seemed to shift position when she wasn't looking. Shadows slid in slow patterns, though the sun above remained steady. The deeper she went, the more she felt the orchard was guiding her, not the other way around. It was then that she heard it, a sound unlike the hum of the other trees, lighter, almost crystalline. It drifted faintly on the breeze, as though carried by invisible bells. She froze, tilting her head, trying to catch it fully. The sound came again soft, delicate, unmistakably musical. Notes like glass, tapping gently against glass. Curiosity sparked. She followed. The path narrowed, the earth beneath her feet, soft with fallen petals that glimmered pale in the dimming light. The air here was different, sweeter, and with every step the sound grew clearer, the tinkling, chiming melody of leaves that were not like any others she had seen. At last, she reached the tree. It stood alone in a small clearing, its branches spreading wide, its trunk thick with age. But it was the leaves that caught her breath. They shimmered, translucent, thin as spun glass, each one shaped like a teardrop and trembling as if eager to be moved by the slightest stir of air. When the wind brushed through, they struck gently against one another, ringing with a sound so pure it seemed less like music and more like memory carried on air. Maris stepped closer, the chime of the leaves wrapped around her, 1,000 fragile notes blending into a lullaby without words. She felt her chest tighten, not with fear, but with recognition. She lowered herself to the ground at the base of the tree. The grass here was soft, silvery in the shifting light. She leaned against the trunk, rough and warm beneath her back, and closed her eyes. The song changed. The chiming leaves gathered themselves into a pattern, rising and falling with deliberate rhythm. It was no longer a random chorus of notes, a familiar one, the lullaby her mother used to sing. Maris's breath caught. The notes curled around her, delicate, persistent, the melody shaping itself exactly as she remembered, except that she had not remembered, not until this moment. She had forgotten the sound of it long ago, the words slipping from her mind, the tune dissolving in the noise of years. Yet here it was, carried whole by a tree in the heart of an impossible orchard. The lullaby filled her ears, and with it came her mother's voice. It was gentle, warm, slightly frayed at the edges from long days, but steady. Her mother had always sung softly, her voice weaving comfort into every note. Maris could almost feel the sway of her cradle, the press of a blanket tucked beneath her chin, the light touch of fingers brushing her hair from her forehead. She could see it now, the small bedroom where she had slept as a child, shadows climbing the walls, the faint glow of a lamp left burning low. Her mother's face leaned over her, lit softly, eyes full of love. The song poured out, unhurried, soothing, patient. Tears spilled down Maris's cheeks. She had thought she had lost this. She had thought memory had stripped it away, leaving only a vague impression of safety, of warmth. She had tried to hum it herself years later, but could never recall the shape of the melody. And yet the orchard remembered. The tree carried it whole. The chime of the leaves rose and fell, filling the clearing with sound, both fragile and eternal. The lullaby seemed to vibrate not only in her ears, but in her very bones, until she felt herself swaying gently, as if rocked by invisible hands. For a time, she let herself sink into it completely. She was no longer Maris, the grown woman, wandering through hidden gates. She was the child again, eyes heavy, body small and safe, drifting towards sleep in the rhythm of her mother's voice. When she finally opened her eyes, the song continued, softer now, fading into fragments of notes as the wind stilled. The clearing glowed faintly, the leaves catching light in crystalline edges. Maris touched the ground beside her, fingers curling into the cool grass. She whispered, barely able to speak through the lump in her throat. I had forgotten. The tree answered with a tremble of its leaves, a faint cascade of sound, as though reminding her nothing is ever truly lost. She tilted her head back against the trunk, gazing up at the branches. The lullaby still echoed in her chest, alive once more, whole and bright. She thought of her mother still alive, though far away, their conversations lately too brief, too rushed. The memory of that song made her ache with longing, with the urge to hear her mother's voice again, to thank her for something she had not even realized she missed. The orchard had given her laughter first. Now it had returned a song. It was not simply showing her the past, it was mending it, stitching back pieces she had thought had unraveled forever. Maris stayed until twilight deepened. Shadows stretched across the clearing, and the crystalline leaves shimmered with a glow that seemed almost starlit. The lullaby softened to silence, though she felt it still, thrumming beneath her skin. When she finally rose, she placed her hand against the trunk of the tree. Its bark was warm, almost pulsing faintly beneath her palm. She whispered, "Thank you," and the leaves chimed once more, a final chord of farewell as she made her way back through the orchard. The hum of other trees returned low, steady, waiting. Yet none called to her as strongly as the chime of that one. She knew she would return to it, perhaps many times, but for now, the memory it had given her was enough. At the gate, the vines rustled, the iron sighing as it swung open. The meadow greeted her with its golden grasses, the air warmer, lighter, thinner. She stepped back into the world, but the lullaby followed her, woven now into her breath, her heartbeat, her very steps. She hummed it softly as she walked home. The melody was no longer forgotten. It belonged to her again, carried in her mouth. She knew she would sing it again, not only to herself, but perhaps someday to another, letting the orchard's gift ripple forward into time. And behind her, in the orchard's heart, the tree of forgotten songs chimed on, guarding the lullabies of all who once needed them, reminding the world that what is forgotten is only waiting to be heard again. Branches of friendship. The morning had broken softly, with a sky painted in strokes of pale gold and hushed lavender. The kind of light that promised warmth, but still carried a lingering chill from the night. Maris followed the familiar, overgrown path that wound toward the orchard, the grass brushing her ankles, damp with dew. Each step felt both intentional and guided, as though the orchard itself had whispered for her to come again, to walk beneath its branches and uncover what waited in its silence. The iron gate was no longer foreign to her. It stood tall, rusty in places, but strong, as if time could not quite erode its purpose. She placed her hand on the cool metal and felt its quiet hum, a heartbeat she was learning to recognize as belonging not to the earth or stone, but to the orchard itself. When she pushed it open, the sound was no longer the groan of neglected hinges, but the sigh of welcome. As though it acknowledged her arrival, the trees inside swayed slightly, though the morning air was still, their branches moving like arms reaching to greet her. Maris inhaled, filling her lungs with the fragrance that had become both strange and familiar, a blend of apples ripening, grass freshly crushed beneath her steps, and something intangible, something like memory itself. As she walked deeper, her eyes caught movement near the base of a twisted apple tree. A flicker of shadow, quick and low, darted from one trunk to another. She stopped, uncertain. The orchard was alive in ways she had not fully understood. And while it had shown her moments of deep tenderness, her grandmother's laughter in the taste of an apple, her mother's lullabies in the chime of leaves, there was always an edge of mystery. What else waited here, hidden in the long grass or nestled among the roots? Then she saw it, a cat. The creature emerged slowly, cautiously, its body lean, its fur a patchwork of grays and whites, streaked like smoke across moonlight. Its eyes, sharp and amber bright, locked onto hers with a wariness that carried both defiance and fragility. Maris knelt where she stood, lowering herself so her presence would not loom. The cat's tail twitched once, twice, its ears tilting back, but it did not retreat. For a long breath, neither moved. The orchard seemed to hold itself still, waiting for the outcome of this silent encounter. Then the cat took a step forward, pressing one paw into the soft earth, then another. Maris extended her hand, palm open, fingers relaxed. The cat did not rush, but after a pause, it came close enough to sniff her fingertips, whiskers brushing her skin like delicate threads. When it leaned closer, pressing the curve of its head into her hand, Maris felt something stir inside her, an echo, gentle and bright, of moments she thought she had lost. She was no longer in the orchard. She was small again, barefoot on the back steps of her childhood home, her knees scabbed from climbing trees, her hands sticky with jam. A cat had lived in the alley behind their garden, a scrappy ginger with torn ears and a fierce, unyielding will. She had called him Clover because wherever he walked, it seemed lucky things happened on. Extra cookie at tea, a sudden rainbow after a storm, the comfort of a purr on a lonely afternoon. She remembered sitting on those stone steps with Clover curled against her side, the sound of his purr weaving into the day like a thread stitching everything together. She remembered whispering secrets into his fur, the way children do when they have no one else who will hold the fragile weight of their words. Clover had listened without judgment, his green eyes half closed, his tail flicking lazily, as though promising he would never tell. The orchard returned to her vision, but the warmth of that memory lingered, soft as the fur now beneath her palm. The stray cat pressed closer, winding itself around her legs, and she laughed softly, surprised by the suddenness of the joy. It had been so long since such a sound escaped her so easily, so naturally. "Hello there," she whispered, though her voice seemed small compared to the orchard's vast silence. "Have you been waiting for me?" The cat's only answer was to leap lightly onto the low branch of the tree beside them, its body balancing with elegant precision, tail curling like a question mark. It looked down at her with that same amber gaze, unblinking, as if it had carried her question into consideration. Maris followed, brushing her hand along the bark as she leaned against the trunk. The leaves rustled faintly overhead, though again the wind had not moved. She closed her eyes and, without meaning to, let her thoughts drift. The orchard was not just showing her memories, it was teaching her to feel them fully again, to live inside them without fear of their passing. She realized this as the air shifted and another image unfurled before her, not from her early childhood, but from the restless, uncertain years that followed. She was older, perhaps 12, sitting alone in the schoolyard as children clustered in circles around her. She remembered the sharp ache of isolation, the way laughter could sometimes feel like a wall meant to keep her out, but then like a shadow cutting across sunlight. Clover had appeared once more, slipping into the yard as though the world's rules did not apply to him. He trotted straight to her, curling into her lap in front of everyone. That small act had been enough to break through her loneliness. A few of the other children had come closer, curious, drawn to the bravery of the stray who seemed to choose her above all else. That was how she met Lena, who would become her first real friend. The orchard pulsed faintly, as if affirming the memory. Trust given, trust received. Companionship found in unexpected places. She opened her eyes again, and the cat was still there, watching her, as though it too had seen what she had seen. Perhaps it had. Perhaps the orchard shared its truths, not only with her, but with every living thing that walked within its bounds. Maris sat beneath the tree until the sun climbed higher, warming the grass and painting the apples with light. The cat stretched languidly, then settled at her side, its body pressed against hers in easy confidence. She stroked its fur slowly, rhythmically, the sound of its purr blending with the orchard's quiet hum. She thought of all the times in her life when companionship had been a bridge across loneliness, when trust had come hesitantly but, once offered, had built something unshakable. The orchard was reminding her of these truths now. Not with words, but with presence, with echoes of what had always been hers to carry. She understood that friendship, whether with people or with creatures who walked on silent paws, was a branch stretching outward. It could bend, it could weather storms, but if cared for, it would hold. Hours seemed to pass, though time was slippery here. Eventually, the cat rose, shook itself, and trotted ahead down a narrow path Maris had not noticed before. She stood and followed, her steps quiet but certain. Perhaps the orchard had more to show her, and perhaps this companion was her guide. When they reached the end of the path, they came to a clearing where sunlight poured down in golden shafts, illuminating the grass as if it had been sprinkled with dust from forgotten stars. The cat sat at the center of it, curling its tail around its paws, and looked back at her with a gaze that seemed to hold both question and promise. Maris stepped into the light, feeling its warmth settle into her skin, and she knew with a sudden clarity that she was not walking this orchard alone. She never truly had. The branches above swayed, whispering secrets she could not quite understand but could feel in her bones. She knelt beside the cat once more, resting her hand against its back, and whispered, "Thank you." The orchard seemed to sigh in reply, leaves rustling like applause, the apples gleaming in quiet approval, and Maris understood. In the heart of memory, companionship is never lost. It grows branch by branch, through time, through loss, through rediscovery, even in silence, even in absence. The trust once given continues to bloom. She leaned back against the grass, her eyes closing, the purr at her side, a steady anchor. And in that stillness, she felt not alone, but held. Storms and shadows. The day began in hush, the kind of quiet that carried both promise and warning. The sky above the orchard was pale and heavy, as though it wore a veil of waiting. Maris had grown accustomed to the orchard's gentle rhythms, the sway of branches, the shimmer of light upon ripening fruit, the whisper of memory that lingered in the air like a constant companion. But as she stepped through the iron gate that morning, she felt a shift, subtle at first, but undeniable. The orchard seemed restless. The leaves quivered, though no breeze passed. The grass rippled like the fur of some great creature trembling beneath the surface. Maris stood still for a moment, letting the weight of the air press against her skin. She inhaled deeply, but even the orchard's fragrance was altered. The sweetness of apples was muted, replaced with a metallic temp, sharp as the memory of a blade's edge. She walked further in, her hands brushing against the trunks, as if to reassure them, as if to reassure herself. The cat she had befriended days before darted across her path, fur bristling, tail low, a shadow slipping through shadows. It paused long enough to glance at her, its amber eyes wide, alert, then vanished into the tall grass. Instinct told her this was no ordinary day. Something was approaching. The orchard ground a sound low and long, carried through the roots into the earth beneath her feet. Maris felt it resonate in her bones. She looked skyward, and there it was, a gathering of clouds, thick and bruised, rolling toward her with the solemnity of a tide. Their edges flashed briefly with white fire, and their bellies swelled with the promise of rain. A storm. It would not have surprised her if storms had come before. But this felt different. This felt personal, as though the orchard itself had summoned the tempest. She reached for the nearest branch, its bark rough beneath her palm, and whispered, "Hold on." The first wind came sudden, fierce. It tore through the orchard like a cry, bending the trees until their leaves clashed together in frantic applause. The iron gate behind her shuddered and slammed shut with a clang that echoed like a warning bell. Maris staggered, her hair whipped across her face. It hammered against the orchard, pelting the apples until they thudded to the ground, bruised and broken. The earth softened, turned to mud, swallowing her footsteps with each desperate movement. She ran from tree to tree, pressing her body against them, her arms wrapped around their trunks, as though she could shield them with the smallness of her frame. But she could not protect them all. Branches snapped, leaves tore free, the air filled with the wild cries of wood under strain. Maris's throat tightened as she watched one of the oldest trees its bark, scarred with age. Its branches, broad and heavy, shudder under the force. A great limb split away, crashing to the ground with a sound like thunder. "No," she cried, though her voice was drowned by the storm. The orchard's hum, the one she had come to know as its heartbeat, was faltering, uneven, as if every crack of lightning tore it apart further. Maris pressed her palms to the ground, sinking into the mud, and felt the vibrations ripple beneath her skin. The orchard was in pain. Her chest ached with a sharpness that mirrored it. She understood then the storm outside was not just weather. It was her storm, her fears, her grief, her unspoken sorrows. All the shadows she had carried silently in her heart had found a mirror in this place, and now they threatened to unravel it. Tears blurred her vision, indistinguishable from the rain. "I won't let you break," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the orchard or to herself. Perhaps to both. She rose and pushed forward, stumbling through the torrents until she reached the very center of the orchard. There stood the tree she had come to think of as its heart, the one whose branches had cradled lullabies, whose roots seemed to stretch deeper than memory itself. Its leaves whipped furiously in the wind, its trunk swayed, but still it stood. Maris pressed her body against it, wrapping her arms around its soaked bark. Her cheek lay against its rough surface, and she whispered every word of comfort she could summon. Words of resilience, words of trust. She thought of her grandmother's laughter, her mother's songs, the friendship of the stray cat, the warmth of every memory the orchard had given back to her. She poured them into the tree, as though weaving a shield of remembrance, strong enough to outlast the storm. The sky cracked open, lightning slicing it with raw brilliance. Thunder followed, rolling through the orchard like the growl of some ancient beast. The tree trembled violently beneath her, but Maris held fast, refusing to let go. Her nails dug into the bark, her clothes clung heavy with water, her body shivered with cold, but her will stood firm. And then she did something she had not done in years. She sang. Her voice was shaky, small at first, but it grew, steadied by the rhythm of her heart and the desperate need to be heard. She sang one of the lullabies her mother used to hum, the same melody the orchard had once returned to her. The notes rose against the howling wind, fragile yet unyielding, threading through the chaos like a silver cord. The orchard listened. The hum beneath her palms began to strengthen, deep and resonant. The branches above stopped thrashing and began to sway instead, moving in time with her song. The rain still poured, but it softened, its rhythm gentler, its weight less crushing. Even the thunder seemed too quiet, rolling away into the distance like a beast tamed dot. Maris sang until her voice broke. But by the time silence fell, the storm had begun to pass. The sky opened in fractured pieces, shafts of light breaking through, touching the orchard with trembling fingers of gold. The damage was plain. Broken branches littered the ground, apples lay scattered and bruised, leaves clung in wet clusters. Yet the orchard stood. It had not been torn apart. It had weathered the storm. Maris leaned back against the tree, her body weak with exhaustion, her tears mingling with the rain still dripping from the branches. She closed her eyes and felt the hum beneath her hand steady, strong. The orchard was alive, scarred but breathing, just like her. She understood now. The storm had been a test, not one of strength, but of resilience. The orchard mirrored her heart, not invulnerable, not untouched by loss, but still capable of standing after the fiercest winds had passed. Fragility and strength were not opposites. They were intertwined, branches of the same tree. The stray cat reappeared, padding softly through the wet grass, its fur plastered, but its steps assured. It leaped onto her lap without hesitation, curling there, purring despite the chill. Maris stroked it gently, her hand trembling but steadying with each pass. "You stayed," she whispered, and to herself. The clouds drifted apart, the sky clearing into a tender blue. Sunlight caught on the raindrops, still clinging to the leaves, turning the orchard into a cathedral of prisms. Everywhere she looked, light refracted into colors she had never noticed before. Small rainbows glimmering, fragile yet real. Maris smiled faintly. Storms would come again of that, she had no doubt, but so would sunlight, and she would be here, ready to weather both, just as the orchard had taught her. The orchard whispered back in its language of rustling leaves. In its shadows and its storms, it had shown her not only its own resilience, but hers. And in that moment, beneath the dripping boughs, Maris felt herself rooted more deeply than ever before. The harvest of tomorrow. The air had softened, where storms once roared and shadows pressed heavy on the orchard's heart. A new quiet had arrived, different from the silences that came before. This one was not empty, nor waiting. It was full, the kind of quiet that follows healing, when wounds have closed but the skin is still tender. Maris stood at the orchard's gate once more, her fingers lingering on the iron as she looked inside. The grass was still bent from the weight of rain. The branches still bore scars of the storm, yet sunlight lay across it all like a blessing. She pushed the gate open and stepped within, her boots brushing through grass that glittered with the last of the dew. The orchard hummed, steady now, no longer trembling, its heartbeat deep in the earth and the air. Maris inhaled, and this time she did not taste only memory, but something lighter, something like beginning. She walked slowly, noticing what she had not before, tiny shoots of green breaking through the soil where fallen apples had rested, seeds cracked open by rain and storm, now pushing upward with fragile insistence. She crouched low, brushing her fingers gently over one sprout. Its stem bent under her touch, but did not break. A smile rose on her lips, unbidden but sure. The cat followed at her heels, no longer wary as in the first days, but familiar now, a shadow stitched to her steps. It darted forward sometimes to chase a drifting leaf, then circled back, winding around her ankles before moving on. Its amber eyes held ease, trust earned not by force, but by presence. Maris stopped near the tree she thought of as the orchard's heart. Its bark was dark with the stain of rain, its branches still stripped where the storm had torn them, but its roots were steady, anchored deep. New buds, small but certain, had already begun to form on its highest twigs. Life refused to end here. She laid her palm against the trunk, and instead of fragility, she felt resilience. The orchard did not fear, its wounds. It bore them and grew beyond them, and she understood then that her place was no longer only as visitor. She had been given the orchard's trust, just as she had given it hers. Now it was asking something more. The thought came slowly, gently, as though the orchard itself was planting it in her mind to care, to tend, to sow. Maris had never seen herself as a caretaker of anything lasting. Life had carried her forward with too many goodbyes, too many moments when what she loved slipped from her hands into memory. But the orchard showed her something different. It showed her that memory was not only for looking back, it could root forward too, if given soil and patience. She moved toward a patch of ground near the fallen limb that the storm had claimed. The earth there was raw, open, waiting. She knelt and pressed her hands into the soil. It was damp, cool, alive. She dug carefully with her fingers until she made a hollow, then reached into her pocket. She had brought with her the seeds of an apple, gathered from the fruit that had fallen days before. Tiny, black, almost insignificant, yet when she placed them into the ground, they seemed heavy with meaning. She covered them with soil, pressing it gently, then sat back on her heels. "Grow," she whispered. "Grow into what comes next." Her voice was soft, but the orchard answered, leaves rustling, branches stretching, as though they too leaned closer to listen. Maris imagined roots, twining into roots. A promise whispered below the earth where eyes could not see. As she sat there, memory welled again, but this time not of loss. She remembered her grandmother's hands, strong and wrinkled, showing her how to press a seed into a clay pot when she was small. She remembered her mother's voice, reminding her that care is patience, that everything worth loving requires time to bloom. She remembered friends, laughter, fleeting moments of trust. All those echoes were not weights, now they were guides, reminders that love was not finished when someone left. Love was what continued, what was planted, what grew. The orchard shimmered with light. The apples that remained gleamed brighter, their skins polished by sun and rain. The grass swayed gently, no longer frantic but playful. Even the scarred trees seemed to stand taller, their wounds carried with dignity. Maris felt herself mirrored in them. The cat climbed onto her lap, curling against her legs as though sealing the promise she had made to the earth. She stroked its fur, eyes lifting toward the canopy where sunlight fractured into prisms. Each shard of light seemed a tomorrow, countless and infinite, scattering forward. Maris did not know what each season would bring. Storms would come again. Shadows would stretch across the orchard when the sun lowered. But so too would blossoms return, and apples swell with sweetness, and new seeds fall to the soil. This place was no longer only a keeper of the past, it was a field of becoming. She rose and walked slowly along the rows, touching the trunks as she passed. Each tree seemed to bow slightly, acknowledging her, not as a visitor, but as something more. She reached the far edge of the orchard, where wild grass stretched tall and golden. From here, she could see how far it spread, how many stories it had already told, and how many it still held in silence. Her heart ached, but not from sorrow. It was the ache of something wide, something open, the ache of knowing she belonged here. She would walk these rows each morning, tend the sprouts, gather the fruit, listen when the orchard whispered its memories. She would protect it when storms threatened, and celebrate it when blossoms unfurled. She was no longer only a girl stumbling upon a forgotten gate. She was the orchard's keeper. The thought settled into her as naturally as breath, and in that acceptance, she felt lighter, freer, not burdened, but rooted as the sun dipped lower. Painting the orchard in amber and rose, Maris gathered one apple, not pale green as before, but flushed with gold. She held it in her hands and did not bite into it. Instead, she carried it carefully, a gift to herself and to what would come. She sat beneath the orchard's heart tree and placed the apple at its roots, leaving it there to rest, to rot, to feed the soil, to become again. She whispered her gratitude, not only for what the orchard had shown her, but for what it had asked of her, to plant, to trust, to look forward. The orchard breathed around her, alive with quiet certainty. She leaned back, eyes closing, the cat's purr rumbling softly at her side, and let the peace settle into her bones. Love was not only memory, love was seed, and she had planted it. Tomorrow would come, and when it did, the orchard would grow with her. Over the following weeks, Maris made tending a small ritual. Each morning she walked the rows, kneeling by the sprouts to loosen the soil and clear stray weeds. She learned how to coax fragile shoots toward light, and how to steady young limbs with simple stakes. The cat remained her companion, slipping along the paths and keeping watch as she worked. Each task she learned became a kind of prayer. She hummed as she worked, a low tune born of lullabies, and laughter returned to her by the trees, and the rhythm steadied her hands. Sometimes she stayed until dusk, lantern in hand, carefully tying a rope where a young branch leaned too far, or pruning a broken twig with the gentlest touch. Other times she planted wildflowers along the edges to invite bees and songbirds, watching petals tremble and then open like small promises. She kept a journal in which she sketched the scrawl of each sprout and recorded weather and the small peculiarities of each tree, how one liked more sun, how another favored quiet mornings. The pages filled slowly, each entry a map of tending and time. Neighbors noticed the change in the orchard and in her. Some brought tools, others advice, and a few brought jars of preserves as thanks. Maris listened and learned, practicing grafts and watering schedules with a steady patience. She invited a teacher from down the lane to show her how to set simple supports for fragile limbs. And an old woman who kept bees taught her where to plant the wildflowers for maximum honey. The harvest that autumn became a quiet celebration, baskets of fruit shared, pies exchanged, and stories retold beneath the trees. Children ran between trunks, while elders sat on blankets, trading memories and recipes. And the orchard hummed with the new chorus of community. On the first harvest evening, Maris sat beneath the heart tree with a cup of warm cider in her hands. She had pressed apples into jars and tied them with twine, but the true preserve was the gathering itself, neighbors and friends forming a gentle map of care around the orchard. She felt full, not of food alone, but of a life braided with others. When she rose to leave, she pressed her palm to the tree and said simply, "I will be back tomorrow." The vow was quiet and ordinary, but it rooted her in a way she had not known possible. As she walked home, the gate closed behind her, and the path through the tall grass folded itself gently. She carried the scent of apples and the echo of laughter with her, and she understood at last that keeping the orchard was not an ending, but an ongoing tending of what mattered. In planting seeds, she had not only answered the orchard's call, she had made promise with the future itself. Thank you for joining me tonight, here at Whispers of the Night. I hope our time in the orchard brought you peace and rest. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to subscribe. Until next time, may your dreams be gentle and may sleep come easily.